Good morning. I'm Jennifer Palmer, and I'll be your online worship leader today. During the service, we recommend you have your Zoom screen set to speaker view. This is Common Ground, our celebration of worship for people of many paths who are gathering virtually to share in the responsible search for meaning and truth. Pathways is a warm and open community where all who come with open minds and kind hearts are welcome, regardless of ability, age, race, gender identity, or sexual orientation. If you're visiting with us for the first time today, we welcome you to our virtual service and hope you'll visit us in person when we can be together again. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat.
I was looking for speaker view.
To send us a note about your visit or ask for more information about Pathways, email office@pathwaysuu.org. We hope that all who join us today find this a safe and inspiring online place to worship. Our opening song this morning is hymn number 115, God of Grace and God of Glory. The words were written by Harry Emerson Fosdick, who was one of the most prominent liberal ministers of the early 20th century. He was regarded by Martin Luther King Jr. as the greatest preacher of that century. Fosdick was a proponent of ecumenical Christianity, pacifism, and civil rights, whose radio sermons and writings reached and influenced millions.
God of grace and God of glory, on thy people pour thy power, crown thine ancient church's story, bring its bud to glorious flower. Grant us wisdom, grant us courage, for the facing of this hour, for the facing of this hour. Blow the clouds of evil round us, hide thy brightness from our gaze, from the fears that long have bound us. Free our hearts to faith and praise. Grant us wisdom, grant us courage for the living of these days. For the living of these days. Cure thy children's warring madness, bend our pride to thy control. Shame our wanton selfish gladness, rich in things and pure in soul. Grant us wisdom, grant us courage, make thy peace our daily goal. Make thy peace our daily goal. Fill us with the living vision, heal our wounds that we may be bound as one beyond division in the struggle to be free. Grant us wisdom, grant us courage, ears to hear and eyes to see. Ears to hear and eyes to see.
As we virtually light our chalice this morning, please join me in these words by Albert Schweitzer. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us. I invite you now to join in a renewal of our sacred promises. Please read along with me. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve human need to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other. Our call to worship is a stanza from hymn number 1000, Morning Has Come, by Jason Shelton. Tammy Smith will be reading it for us. Please go ahead, Tammy.
Morning has come. Arise and greet the day. Dance with joy and sing a song of gladness. The light of hope here shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home.
Thank you, Tammy. Our worship song this morning is an early African American spiritual, hymn number 30, Over My Head. Oh. There we go.
Over my head, my music in the air. Over my head, my music in the air. Over my head, my music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Over my head.
Our speaker this morning is Reverend Gordon Rowe. He is a retired Methodist minister who became a special education teacher. A few years ago, he and his wife Patsy discovered that they were really Unitarians. They have been active in the Horizon Church for about 20 years. Gordon drew on Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled and Gail Sheehy's Passages for some of the material for his sermon today. We welcome Gordon to our virtual pulpit. We'll begin with 3 readings from the Bible. Our first reading is from Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 12, read for us by Jennifer Bosley.
Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way of the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain.
All right, am I on?
Yes, you sure are.
Well, good morning, Pathways. A very warm welcome to you. My wife and I have been active in Horizon Church for over 20 years, and I remember when Pathways started. I thought we all thought that we needed more Unitarian presence in North Texas. I still believe that. Now, these biblical readings, the theme for the day is people going about their business, expecting an ordinary schedule, and suddenly being confronted by something that they did not anticipate. So Moses, who had been rescued from his basket in the river by the Pharaoh's daughter and taken into the Pharaoh's household, had been given a job of watching over the sheep. Moses saw a bush burning. Well, that was certainly an unusual event. Curious, he went to look, and the voice of God spoke from the bush. It said, "Go back to Pharaoh and tell him that I want you to lead my chosen people, now in slavery, back to the promised land." Well, folks, if you've been in the committees and a church member and dealing with other people in a group setting with a mission, you hear all kinds of excuses. Or if you're in the classroom and the student has not done his work, you hear all kinds of excuses. So Moses said, I'm not a very good speaker. Get someone else. Gee, I've heard that a lot of times, haven't you? The Lord answered, I am who I am. And after a little more exchange, Moses accepted the assignment. So for 40 years, he led the people through the wilderness until they arrived at their destination. Now let's hear what has happened to our second hero.
Our next reading is from Matthew chapter 3, verses 13 through 17, read for us by Luke Kimball.
Then Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to be baptized by John. But John tried to deter him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me? Jesus replied, Let it be so now. It is proper for us to do this to fulfill all righteousness. Then John consented. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased.
Another biblical hero who was grasped by a force that he did not understand. Jesus was a 30-year-old carpenter's son. We don't know much about him. That's about all we know, except that he stayed behind at his parents at the temple during Passover to talk to the elders. But then he rejoined his family, and his cousin, John the Baptist, was leading a revival out in the wilderness, baptizing people and bringing them to be enriched by the Spirit. So Jesus came and was baptized, and here again we have a supernatural event. A dove flew out of heaven and lit on the shoulders of Jesus. And Jesus said, all right, this is my call to go, to give up my job in the carpenter shop and to go around and announce the love of God for all the people. And he did this for 40 days. He went out into the wilderness to mull over this new call and was tempted by the devil for 40 days. And then he came back and began his ministry. All right, reader number 3.
Our final reading is from Acts chapter 9, verses 1 through 9, read for us by Jackie Cutlip.
Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? Saul asked. I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting, he replied. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything.
All right, Saul is a very important person. When I was taking a history major at Southwestern, I signed up for a course that said the history of Western civilization in 2 semesters. Well, I thought that that was very ambitious, but each person was given a list of books to read and then take turns making a report to the class. And I looked at this book that said 100 people who have impacted Western civilization. So I chose that one, and it has stayed with me all these years. Number 1 is Isaac Watts. He discovered the scientific method. Things don't just happen randomly. Things happen according to the laws of nature and the laws of science. Number 2 was Mohammed. I don't think we can disagree with that. Mohammed has had enormous influence, especially to people in the Middle East. Number 3 was Jesus. Well, I was sort of relieved that Jesus at least made the list, but and now I look at Jesus as a human prophet in the tradition of Jeremiah and Isaiah. Although Jesus went even further, he stayed in Jerusalem so that he was captured by the Roman government, brought to trial, and sentenced to be executed. But let's get back to Paul. Paul, if he's number 6, let's say for the sake of this discussion, yes, Paul was number 6 on the list of 100 people. We know that he was a Jewish officer, so he had to have been married. Well, there's no mention of his wife anywhere in the New Testament in his own readings. So let's assume that Saul, who changed his name to Paul, was a widower. He talked about his thorn in the flesh. Well, we don't know what that was, but we can Some of the scholars assumed that he was an epileptic, and he was short of stature. So this tent maker, who was let's pretend, who was a widower, an epileptic, and short of stature, became number 6 on this list of all-time people who have influenced history. Now, Saul going to Damascus was struck down by a light, and this is the supernatural force that influenced Paul, that grasped Paul and turned him in another direction. The people who were with him did not see a white light. They were not struck down to the ground. So when Saul got up from the ground, he discovered that he could not see. He was struck blind by this light. So he was taken to the home of one of the Jewish leaders. And in 3 days, he regained his sight and began his ministry, which included writing a lot of books. Most of the New Testament is written by Paul, and who performed some miracles. And for 3 days, he could not eat or drink, but then he was able to recover. Now, these are 3 rather dramatic Bible stories of characters who have been grasped. They have been grasped unexpectedly and forever different. So thanks for the invitation to take part today. And let me tell you about my journey from Methodist local church to Unitarian special education teacher. We've all had chapters. Let's reflect on that a minute. You've had a chapter, you're in your current chapter. Are you happy with your current chapter? Are you looking for a new chapter? That can be done. I had friends who left the pastoral ministry saying, these people just don't care. In South Texas, people would say, well, everybody has to belong to a church. You have to have some answer to the question of what church do you belong to? That is good for business, and I want my children to have a church experience. Now, I am sympathetic up to a point, but a little bit intolerant, because if they don't believe in the doctrines of the church, why would they want to join? My change of vocation came over a period of 2 or 3 years, in which I became convinced that my personality was better suited for the classroom than for the pastoral ministry. Now, Methodists are methodical in their program, and the ministers had a study topic every year. One year it was a psychological topic in which we were invited to fill out a questionnaire, sharing our strengths and weaknesses. Give the same questionnaire to the spouse, which in that day and time was the wife, and give it to 4 or 5 friends. Then we met in small groups with the psychologist at the retreat, and each person got a 30-minute session with the psychologist. When I walked in and sat down at the desk, the psychologist said, your profile does not fit that of the other pastoral ministers. Well, I had known that for some time, but I was glad that the psychologist caught on. And so that was a turning point that motivated me to begin moving in a new direction. I took a sabbatical. The Methodist Church is very generous in that respect. Enrolled in UNT in the education program, and my wife got a job teaching at Louisville High School. It was clear to me, and during one of the education lessons, the professor came in and said, some of you should consider special education. And he read a list of characteristics of a special education teacher. And I thought to myself, how does he know me that well? So this was my turning point, and this is my call. Have I talked about my studies in history in Southwestern? I talked about that, didn't I? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. All right, next idea. I'm just not religious. Now, I have heard that many times, a statement from many people. When I was a pastor in South Texas, during evangelical or recruitment rallies, we would go around and try to recruit people to become saved and to join the church. And some people would say, oh, I'm just not religious. I'm curious about this statement because it implies religious is an adjective. like athletic or musical. Everyone has a religion. And to say I can say I am not athletic. I can say I am musical. Everybody should be able to say it. I am religious and understand what that means. Now, all of us have had chapters in life. I'm very much caught up in that idea. You can always end one chapter and go on to the next chapter. My parents did not have that luxury. My grandparents did not have that luxury. But I'm amazed at the young adults, let's say the 15 to 25-year-old group, who have an amazing number of choices. Amazing number of choices. I get dizzy when I'm talking to some of these folks, and they say they have 10 or 12 choices laid out in front of them, all of them attractive, all of them within reach. Another key time period is the 35 to 45 decade. Gail Sheehy calls this the deadline decade. Now think of your 35 to 45-year-old people. Many of you are in that group or older. That's the group, that's the time in which we have finished our education. We probably have gotten married. We probably have a couple of children, but the children are old enough to furnish on their own. They don't need much help. And you're in your career. You have peaked out in that career. You don't have much chance of going any further, and you're not interested in going any further. You've done everything that you want to do. Horizon has had 2 second career ministers. Both of them were effective. In our 20 plus years, Dennis Hamilton and Laura Brandes, both second career, both effective. And when I was teaching, we always had in the building second career teachers, retired military. They make great teachers, retired business people, retired homemakers who needed another outlet for their lives since their children were grown. Now, I love to go to church rallies and week-long retreats. When I was a teenager, at the end of the time, we had a consecration service, and there were 3 calls. I wonder if this is familiar with anybody. First, do you accept Jesus Christ as your personal Savior for the first time? And we might have a half dozen to respond to that. Second, do you wish to rededicate your life to Christ? And that was the majority of the delegation. The third call, have you been called to dedicate your life to full-time Christian service? And another dozen would respond. Well, I was never happy with that because it sounds as if you go forward for the third call, dedicate your life to full-time Christian service, that sort of weakens the second call. Do you accept Christ as your personal Savior, or do you rededicate your life to Christ as a personal Savior? But now we have changed, and I'm much happier with this. The third call would be, will you devote your life to a church-related vocation? Now think about the phrasing there, full-time Christian service. That could be a doctor, that could be a grocer, that could be a homemaker, that could be a businessman, that could be an attorney. And the third call, do you devote your life to full-time, to church-related vocation? So I think that narrows it down a little bit. And we certainly have a number of very attractive people who have answered that call. Now, if our lives have chapters, that has become a very important idea to me. It's okay to change chapters. If our lives have chapters, being grasped by an unfamiliar force is an upsetting experience. We have been restless, and we are sure that other people have a better deal than we do. And we know that we want to move on. We don't have any clear path as to how to do it. The prospect of continuing our present schedule is frightening. So we must leave our current chair and move on to another. Now, there is a definite loneliness, a horrible day-by-day feeling that you're in the wrong circumstances. And that results in fear, uneasiness, and a sense of wobbling, a sense of wobbling. Now think about your own lives for a minute, Unitarians. Have you passed through to another chapter? Are you interested in looking at another chapter? If you're happy with the chapter that you're in, can you approach the chapter tomorrow with a new enthusiasm, with a new happiness, with a new sense of purpose. When we are confronted, we can turn sadly away, or we can move forward and feel more contentment, some excitement in our lives, and we are reassured. Adjust to the new chapter and what it promises. Now, what does a call mean? Usually there is a series of experiences that stir the process. During this time, the still small voice speaks quietly, but persistently. And these chapters are preceded by small turning points that may teach us that our current chairs do not fit anymore, but the Spirit will not let go. The still small voice says, move on, move on. Now we may ignore these signals, and I have talked to people who ignored those signals for several years, but the voice is persistent. Move on, move on. Finally comes the major turning point, the experience at which you can point to that experience which changed your life. I had been in the ministry several years, and I went to an annual conference one time. The Methodists are big on conferences. We have annual conference once a year. All of us get together. And when I went to annual conference one time, the boy that I had in my parish named Becky came up to me, we shook hands, and we said, Gordon, I want to thank you for that sermon in May of 1972. Well, I was sort of amazed. You can remember one sermon? And he said, yes. I was a senior in high school. I was wondering what to do with my life. And when you preach the sermon that says, we're all Christians, we all need to practice full-time Christian service, but we need some people in church-related vocations. And Bucky said, that was my call. Well, I was rather amazed. And of course, I was very pleased that this young man had heard that entreaty, that appeal, and had changed his life, gone to college, gone to seminary, and was being very effective in serving churches. So we are grasped. God is working his purpose out in our lives. We can respond or we can shy away. Grasped by ultimate concern, confronted again, challenged again, but mysteriously, we are given the grace to live another day. Now, what is the still small voice saying to you today? It may be saying, go back to what you're doing now, but do it with a new enthusiasm, with a new energy. So how the still small voice is calling, how will you respond? May it be so.
Thank you so much, Reverend Rowe. Our virtual chalice extinguishing is by Elizabeth Sell Jones. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our closing song for today is hymn number 108, My Life Flows On in Endless Song.
My life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I hear the real, though far off hymn that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing?
We hope that each of you on your individual path through the joys and questions of life found some common ground with your fellow travelers today. Reverend Gordon Rowe will give our benediction today. Please go ahead, Reverend Rowe.
Spirit of life, we are very grateful for the things that come our way. We know that of all people, we are most fortunate. We have food, we have clothes, we have shelter, we have freedom of religion, we have energy, we have a call of some sort that motivates us to get up tomorrow and start fulfilling that call. Guide us in the days ahead, that our lives might be pleasing in your sight. Amen.
Our thanks again to Reverend Gordon Rowe, to our readers, Tammy, Jennifer, Luke, and Jackie, and to all of you who joined our Zoom service today. Gordon will be able to stay and talk with us for a while after the service. So let's take some time to thank him, ask questions, let him know what we thought, and visit for a bit. The adult groups will start at 11:30.